You guys have some snow in Milwaukee right now.
We do. We got 8 inches yesterday.
Nice.
It's beautiful.
It looks like it's sunny. I can see the sun coming in your window.
It's sunny and beautiful outside. I love winter. Said no one ever, but I really do.
Not no one ever. Those people exist, and you're proof.
Hmm.
Also, the millions of people that live in any vicinity of anywhere that has a solid winter. I think they probably all have to enjoy it at least a little bit.
Yeah. Otherwise, it'd be miserable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Some PA. We got people from a little bit of everywhere. So I'm excited to have people on
Love it.
today to talk about embracing conflict. Aren't you excited, Barrett?
I love conflict.
Yes, because
No.
conflict can be productive.
Healthy conflict is actually pretty cool,
It is.
which we'll talk about the difference.
Well, it's 2:01.
Let's do
So
it.
we'll jump in. I'll share a screen. Welcome, welcome, everybody. As everybody's flowing in, I'm going to go ahead and just share a little bit about who we are and where we're from here in the ACT community. So, you already know you're here for Embracing Conflict for Practice Growth, and Barrett is the CEO of our Best Practices Association and ACT Dental Practice Coaching. And I am Miranda Beeson, and I'm the Director of Education and a lead practice coach. And we're going to walk you through why embracing conflict can be impactful in a positive way in your practice and help you to understand a few strategies and frameworks to make it feel better for you, to make you feel a little more excited about embracing conflict than maybe you have been in the past. We always like to share with you a little bit about who we are, and we have multiple components to what we do with the Best Practices Association and our ACT Dental coaching community. And one of those things is our To the Top study club. And at the top of every webinar, Kirk, our fearless leader who is not with us today, likes to offer anyone who is interested after today and hearing a little bit more about what it's like to be in the room with us for our study club events. We do have a golden ticket. And so, dentists, you can join us in Milwaukee, and we have sessions every quarter. You can come sit in the room with us and learn a little bit. But more importantly, what we love is learning from each other and having our other To the Top study club members and our pro coaching clients and guests in the room, and we all learn and chat and talk about the pain points that everybody struggles with all the time. And it's a great community where people become friends. So if you're interested at the end of this and hearing a little bit more about joining us for To the Top, we do have this golden ticket, and we will have a QR code at the end as well, because our summer session of To the Top study club is going to be focused on leadership and culture and help take some of these strategies to the next level. So we're really excited because most people know us as a pro coaching company working with dentists and their teams to help create more aligned, smart, and healthy practices. And we're expanding into this greater world of the Best Practices Association, where we're taking what we've done all these years and we're putting it into an online community where everybody can have access at whatever level suits them best. And when you join our Best Practices Association, there's couple of different ways you can really enjoy that experience. And one of them is to do it on your own. You can join our platform via an app. You can download the app on your phone, super simple. And you can hop on your desktop. And when you join the BPA, you have the opportunity to explore what's in there by way of our events, our event recordings, our resources, and our community forums, chatting with other people just like you, to take on some of the things that we share and chat about and coach clients on, and try it on your own and see how you do. And if you get in that path and decide, I do like this, but I think I'd like a little more support, then you could join our To the Top study club, where you can do it in a group. And we're focused on the same things that you're going to be learning within the BPA on your own. However, we're taking it to the next level by offering accountability and support. And you're starting to get the mentorship and friendship of the community. And then to take it one step further, if you really just say, I think I need someone to hold me accountable as a leader on this journey, that's what our one on one pro coaching services are for. And I mentioned I'm a lead practice coach. There's a lot of us, about 10 or 11 of us now, and we absolutely love working with dentists and their teams to improve their practice. And you can see here, better practice, better life. That's our core purpose. So whether you're in the Best Practices Association and our BPA, if you are in our To the Top study club community, or you're in a pro coaching community, all we're trying to do is help you to live a better practice and ultimately a better life. And so that's part of what our webinar is going to hopefully do today. Any thoughts, Barrett?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're there and you're watching this, you're hopefully you know of us and you think we're pretty great. But if you haven't found your people yet, if you haven't found your community yet, if you're like, boy, I really wish I could find that group of people that I trust and think like me and I can go to for help. That's why we've created these 3 levels. And we just encourage you to join us at whatever level makes sense for you. And I think you'll find that we're here to help you make your practice and your life as great as it can be.
Yeah. So if you want to do that, feel free to search up on your Google Play Store or your Apple iStore. What is it? An iStore? Yeah. Best Practices
She uses
Association.
Google, you can tell. It's the App Store.
It's the App Store. Okay, great. And you can search Best Practices Association, and you're going to see a little logo, a little icon, just like you see here on the screen. That's us. Download it. If you're already part of our community, you'll have login credentials already. If you're not, you can create them and get started today. So, speaking of getting started, we're going to get started with the content. So, today's program is Embracing Conflict for Practice Growth. And as always, we like to start with why this is important. And the biggest thing is when you embrace practice conflict within your practice, you're going to provide an opportunity to grow, not only by way of what we think of as growth in the end, which is productivity and profitability, but all of that's going to come by growing your culture and growing the ability for you and your team to function at a higher level together. And so it allows us to spot assumptions that may not be true, giving the team the benefit of new and different ideas. I think that what we'll discover together today is that our perception of conflict is probably a little bit different than what conflict really is or what it can be. Because ultimately, we're just trying to get new ideas and voices and perspectives into the conversation so that we're all working on a problem and headed in the same direction, but maybe thinking a little bit differently than we have before. Embracing conflict encourages open and honest communication, prevents lingering tensions and resentment. That's a big one that pops up in our practices. And it builds trust and psychological safety. We've been talking a lot about trust and we've been talking a lot about psychological safety in our podcasts and webinars and programs lately because it's becoming a lost commodity amongst a lot of people and certainly professionals. And we see it showing up more and more just as an entire community as we start to trust less what we're seeing in the news or what we're seeing online, or certainly, what some of the things that AI are contributing are really positive, and some of the things that AI is contributing is making us start to question what we know. And so it's our job as leaders, and I consider everyone in the practice to be a leader. The title doesn't make you that, but it's our job as leaders to foster and build trust and to create this level of psychological safety for our team. Because without trust and without that safety, we're not going to feel like we can engage in these conflict embracing conversations in a positive way. So we can't stress enough how important that last piece is around trust and psychological safety. So I want to put into perspective some of the why that really fits like what might be happening in your practice or an experience you might have experienced yourself over time. So conflict is the secret to true, authentic trust. And when you avoid having tough conversations, you're going to stay stuck. And on the surface, you maintain the surface level relationship. You don't get down into the depths of it where real progress can really happen. So here's an example of what can happen if we don't embrace conflict and then we end up stuck. So, for example, you have Sarah and Emily, and they're both dental assistants in a practice, and they have conflict in regards to setup styles. Sarah prefers to fully prepare, while Emily sets up only what's needed, and frustration starts to build over time. It isn't addressed. And slowly, Sarah will start to silently resent Emily. And when tensions finally surface, a direct conversation reveals that their differing perspectives are at the base of all of this. By talking it out, they find a compromise, strengthening their trust and teamwork, and it proves to avoid these tough conversations, just keeps us stuck. So I see this happening in practices that I coach. I've lived it in practices over the 20 plus years that I experienced private practice life. What we end up doing in a situation like this is we start storytelling. And Sarah starts telling herself Emily just doesn't care because Emily just has a different approach to how she sets up the room. And then Emily starts telling herself a story about how Sarah's bossy and, micromanaging and just wants me to do everything just like her. And in the end, after months and months of this storytelling and this resentment brewing and the tension that even our patients can feel, all it would have taken is one conversation, one tough conversation to say, I'm feeling like this, you're feeling like that. We got to figure out a middle ground here. And they can resolve all of that and realize, oh, we just have different perspectives in how we take this challenge on and we can work through this together. And we can eliminate some of those things that take us into this place of being stuck and not being able to make progress as a unit. Barrett, I'm
Yeah.
interested in your perspectives on these because you are a dentist. You own your own practice for over 20 years, right?
Oh, not quite 20 years.
Okay.
So everyone listening has some of this conflict going on right now in your practice. And if you say no, we don't, you're lying or naive to the reality. There is always some level of brewing conflict. Now, one thing, and I know Miranda, you're going to delve into this later, but one thing to determine is we don't mean conflict by interpersonal conflict between Sarah and Emily. That's the wrong kind of conflict. We're talking about vulnerability based conflict around a differing opinion on ideas, systems, or ways to improve the practice. So you can see that we'll dig into this example because it's such a good one, and you can see how without some of these habits and frameworks set up, interpersonal conflict is forced. Interpersonal conflict here is forced between these two because they're forced to tell themselves a story. Sarah's forced to assume Emily is lazy. And vice versa. I might get the name of it. Emily is forced to assume that Sarah's just being overbearing and strict. Okay. Now, why is it forced? Because one, there may not be a written system of how we set up an operatory. Right. So instantly when we have, and number two, they haven't had an agreement to be vulnerable with one another.
Mm-hmm.
In my practice, I had a 48-hour rule. It was posted, it was up on the lunch wall, and we called it the 48-hour rule. And it meant when something's bugging you, you got 48 hours to talk to that person and clarify their intentions. Again, not to create conflict, not to like point out you're doing it wrong, to clarify their intentions.
I love
Hey,
that.
I noticed something. I want to ask you about it, and let's talk about it.
Mhm.
And if after 48 hours I determined that it wasn't important enough for me to go to Sarah, then I can't bring it up 2 years later and say, you don't set up the operatory good enough for the last 2 years. Well, why didn't you tell me 2 years ago? Okay, so one, we have to agree that we're going to be vulnerable with one another. I'm going to be okay coming to you. You're going to be okay hearing it. And
Mhm.
I'm going to be okay hearing what you have to say, as long as we're talking about a triangulated thing. We're talking about the system.
The
We're talking
problem.
about the
Yep.
practice. We're talking about the idea to succeed. We're not talking about you're this and I'm this. And so you can see that there's a different definition of conflict that's really, really important to understand before any of this will be able to be implemented.
Yeah, I like to look at, and you're right, we'll tackle some of the framework for how to rephrase our mindset around some of that. But I like to think of conflict as, again, it's usually not about a you or a me or a them. It's something. Like again, I always just like you go back to the system. There's something with the system. There's something with expectation that wasn't clear or isn't clear. And it's us actually working together to solve and create this remedy to this problem. And so it takes away the you versus me. And visually, the representation I always share is it's not you and I sitting across a table with a problem in the middle and it's the two of us against each other with this problem. It's you and I sitting on the same side of the table collaborating together looking at this problem saying like hey, we're on the same team. We just have to figure out how to make this system better or this problem go away. So I love that 48-hour rule. That's great. That's your first takeaway, everyone. Make a sign, hang it in your office. The other thing is that avoiding the hard issues can cost you time and money and team morale. So this really feeds off of what you were just saying is if it's 2 years later, imagine what you've cost yourself in that 2 years by not just having that one tough conversation. According to Gallup, disengaged employees cost US businesses up to $605 billion a year. And if you think about it in your practice, one disengaged team member can ripple through the toxicity. It disrupts your culture, it slows progress. Eventually, like sometimes you even lose patience because there are practices where that disengagement breeds this negative energy that's felt throughout the practice and it is felt by patients. Or we get so caught up in this conflict of you versus me and not looking at the systems that can create the efficiencies or the remedy to the problem that our patients sadly are the ones who then experience the negative side of that because we never get to where we're creating a better experience for them. So here's an example, right? A team member consistently arriving late, causing delays in morning huddle and disrupting the team's flow. The doctor avoids addressing it, hoping it's going to improve, but instead, frustration spreads. Others start showing up late, morale drops, and efficiency suffers. Eventually, turnover increases. This is costing your practice time and money and rehiring and training. And by avoiding this one issue, the entire team and ultimately patients pay the price, proving that a hard conversation can protect culture and progress and affect your bottom line in a positive way or negative, depending on how you manage it. And Barrett, I know we've talked about this before. The culture that you are creating is either intentional or it's happening by way of what you're allowing to persist. And so when you allow a team member to show up late over and over, and now someone else starts doing it because they can see that clearly here in this culture, this is permissible, where on the inside, you go back to your office after morning huddle and you're so frustrated that that person showed up late again. And now two people showed up late and huddle was a mess. And now we're getting started late. And it takes one solid, tough conversation, embracing conflict and saying, I know we all want what's best for our patients. And I know we all want to have a smooth running day where we feel good at the end of the day. So we got to figure this out. Let's figure it out together. And that's what this is really all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about this, like these are real situations that I have experienced. Um, Showing up late, not setting up the trays right. There's all sorts of conflict around the sterilization room and dropping trays or pushing trays, all that stuff. And imagine if we think about the real world, all of this happened in my practice too. So I'm just as guilty and failed miserably at being a leader, just as much as anyone listening. How many brain cells were used on the stories? How much energy did Emily assume Sarah was lazy only 2 years later to find out, like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to set up the full tray because we don't have a written system. I just didn't know. That's no problem. I will totally do it. Oh, man, that was 2 years of pain. Or showing up late. I know it seems like everyone should show up, but some people just don't know that. And maybe if we told them right away, like, hey, I really need you here early. Doctor, one, you got to step up. But even the team members that are here, it is more, it is morally more correct to address it than to allow it to fester and allow the side conversations to go on. Don't let that happen. If we're not willing to be vulnerable and hold someone accountable in a very healthy way, then we are even worse than if we go to the side and start talking. That's not okay. And
Yeah.
doctors, it starts with you, but team members too. I mean, what a great way to make yourself super valuable in a work environment is to step up and be the right kind of leader and say, hey, we're not going to do that. Let's just all show up on time. What do we need to do to help you show up on time? And you
Well, and
might find
Barrett,
out
when
that they got life stuff going on that you can help them with. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Let me help you with that. And so we just got to learn to talk to each other. I mean, this is a metaphor for our country, for our world, for our life, for our
our marriages
marriages,
are,
for
yeah,
our kids. I mean, holy cow, we just got to learn to talk better to one another.
it's so true. And you made a great point just then of, mentioning leaders being a strong leader and then peer-to-peer accountability. And that's part of what I was mentioning just really quickly earlier was I don't think that the doctor is the only leader in the practice or the office manager is the only leader in the practice. I really like to think of every team member has the ability to be a leader. Because when somebody comes to you, when Sarah in this example comes to you complaining about Emily, and you're the patient care coordinator, you're not in the back, you don't know what's going on, but you guys are friends, you hang out after work sometimes. So Sarah comes to vent to you about Emily. You're a leader when you say, Sarah, I think you're having a conversation with the wrong person right now. Right? That's what makes you a leader in the practice, no matter what your title is or what your role is saying, I hear that you're frustrated. You're my friend and I care about you. But I think you're having a conversation with the wrong person right now because I can't help you solve this problem. This is a problem that exists within the realm of you and Emily and your chairside assisting responsibilities. And so, as a leader on the team, I'm going to encourage you to have that tough conversation with Emily that you need to have. And I call it a tough conversation, but I'm hoping that by the end of this webinar, people will see that it's really not as tough when our mindset is in the right place around what we're trying to create through these conversations and through these experiences. So
Yeah,
we're gonna do another one. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. I just have so much, like, my emotions from years of owning practice are literally coming out right now. Um, if you're a team member and you're really good, you set up that darn tray great every time. You're super awesome at four-handed dentistry. You're good with the patients, and you think, and you are rightfully, you're a great dental assistant or hygienist or admin. The way to be truly valuable to your doctor, and the way to be this is as a doctor talking, to be able to go and say, hey, I'm really good and I do deserve that pay raise. It's to be a cultural leader.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, I can get a lot of people, I can train and work with a lot of people to be technically great. There's a ton of technically wonderful dental practitioners out there, dentists and team members alike. But what makes someone truly valuable to me as the leader is someone that helps me with culture. The person that stops that and says, remember, 48-hour rule. I would be happy to help how to go to her, but you're going to go to her. Remember, 48-hour rule, go to doctor. You've got to tell him that he's doing this that bugs you. Remember, 48-hour rule, to your point, I'm not the right person. When someone is helping me create a culture of healthy conflict, of vulnerability, now I can't pay them enough because I can always find someone to be great at hygiene. I can always find someone to be great dental assistant. I can find always someone to be great up front. It's really hard to find someone that's going to help with the culture and truly lead. And when you find those people, I will pay them as much as they want. And if you want, we get this question a lot. How do I grow in dentistry? How do I advance? How do I become more of a leader in sometimes what can feel like this glass ceiling? This is it. It's working on this and showing your team what it's like to work in a healthy environment. Not only does it make going to work a lot more fun, but it elevates your status as a leader, and people will emulate you and model their actions after you. And all of a sudden, you went from a hygienist to kind of one of the top two leaders in the practice, and it's really fun when that happens.
Barrett, you just said something else that made me think I didn't build this in at all, but we also do have to think about where people come from. So this can be new. If you're coming into a practice that embraces conflict in a healthy way, and you weren't in that environment in the past, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel strange. It's going to feel awkward. But you're going to notice really quickly if you come to a practice as a team member and you're new and they have a really strong culture around autonomy and everyone's a leader and we're stewards of this practice and we embrace conflict. The second that you start creating negative conflict within the practice, everyone on that team is going to turn things around. You're going to see really quickly, like, oh, this feels weird here. This doesn't fit here. And so, like you said, when you have those people, I think that leads us right into this next point of when it's done right and you can unlock the potential in these high performance teams. Now you
Mhm.
have a team. And when I say high performance, I don't always mean outproducing everybody else because that's great. But if you have someone outproducing everyone else on your hygiene team, but they are toxic to your culture and they're creating issues and not resolving conflict, I wouldn't consider them high performer. They're actually a detriment. So high performing teams don't tiptoe around issues. They talk them through. They address challenges head on. Because, like we said, that's what builds trust. And the more and more that you practice this and put it into play, the stronger the trust starts to build between the team members, between leadership and the team. And eventually, you're going to be more creative. You're going to be able to explore bigger and better ideas than you ever thought you could have. You're going to have better patient experiences. And ultimately, it impacts growth, but in a way that you never really thought about growth for your practice. It's not in the traditional way that we talk about and think about growing our practice. So I'm going to give an example. So a dental assistant feels undervalued because their ideas for improving workflow are ignored. And so I can imagine this, right? This is that high performance person who's like, I'm full of great ideas. I'm invested in this. I get your vision. I want to help you get there. But they're frustrated because there's not this place in the practice for new ideas. We don't really allow the open communication around that because it can feel a little conflicting for people sometimes. So this person starts to get frustrated. They start disengaging from team discussions. They're noticing the shift. The doctor's schedules a one on one conversation, invites honest feedback. Together, they're then able to embrace conflict and have a conversation that helps to address the concerns that the assistant is struggling with, saying, like, I'd like to be able to provide ideas around how I think we can improve efficiency. When that person feels heard and respected, the assistant's going to re-engage with the team. They're going to bring those fresh ideas, they're going to bring that energy. And when you tackle that conflict, the doctor is not only going to strengthen trust with that team member, but ultimately all of the team members because it starts to radiate out and around. And now we're unlocking this person's full potential. It benefits the entire practice. And just did a podcast with Kirk yesterday on how do you build a team that stays. This assistant is going to stay, right? It's hard right now to find good talent, hiring, recruiting, it's expensive, onboarding. So if you can take the time to embrace conflict and open yourself up to exploring one-on-one these vulnerable conversations to learn where your team members are, you're going to grow the practice. It's going to benefit you and the practice. It's going to benefit the patients, and ultimately those people are going to want to stay a part of your team because it feels really good to be in a practice that has a healthy, trusting culture.
The check-ins. So in our coaching, we coach our clients to set up a rhythm of communication. One key part of that is a one-on-one check-in with each of your team members. Every almost every week, I the importance of the check-in goes up for me. Like, it literally checks so many boxes for doctors becoming better leaders. And one of them is just this. And I can speak from personal experience. When I had check-ins, when I have check-ins, it's an opportunity. It's a safe place for that team member to confide in me, for that team member to say, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with Emily because I think she should be doing this differently. And it you can do it so it's not a place to complain, but rather a place to, like, okay, I hear you. What are you going to do about it? Well, I know you're going to tell me, they always say, I know you're going to tell me I have to go talk to him. Absolutely. Do you need help with how to do it, when to do it? Yeah, I really like, okay, let's talk through it. What mental state do you need to be in? When do you need to do it? What are some words you should or shouldn't say? What's fair, what's not? And now you're coaching other leaders. And that conversation would never happen if I didn't have this routine check-in set up. And it's only because not only do you have the check-ins, but I've been doing them for 2 years. So now they know it's a safe place. It's a habit. And
Well,
so the
uh,
check-in just is so, so important. If you're not doing them, just start doing them.
and we're going to talk in just a minute about what are some reasons that people don't embrace conflict quite so much. And you just pointed to several of them right there. And one of them is time. So to jump ahead a little bit, one of them is time. Time, one being like, I don't think I don't even have time to have that conversation right now. And the other being, when is the right time to
Mhm.
have that conversation? So time on kind of two different sides there. So we'll tackle that in just a minute. But the check in, while we're on that subject, that is an integral time that you can build into your schedule. So it's there. Team members can sign up for these one on ones on a consistent rhythm. We know it's coming. And now you don't have to question anymore, when should we have these connection conversations? You don't have to question anymore, like, I don't have time in my schedule. When am I going to even do this? You've built it in all year. You have the time established and built in intentionally into your schedule all year. So that time starts to become less of a barrier. So before we get into those barriers, I want to talk a little bit about conflict and what it actually is, what it can be and what it really should be. So I love this picture and I love the bright red aggressive words because I think this is what most people feel when you hear the word conflict.
Yeah.
Most people hear conflict and immediately think of it as a negative. They think of it as argument or drama or confrontation or this really intense energy. And the preferred image that I like for people to have in mind when they think of conflict is this:
Mhm.
it's really just when you have two differing perspectives or opinions or stories or realities going on that you haven't taken the time to try to fit together to figure out how they can work together towards a better outcome. And so we can sit all day long and think conflict like this, and we're going to get nowhere. Our practice isn't going to grow. It's going to feel icky when we show up every day. Our patients can tell. I've been in those practices where the patient can tell that the doctor and the assistant are not getting along today. Like that doesn't feel good in the room, right? It already does. I'm already nervous. And now I don't even think you guys like each other. What's happening here? So, if we can have this image instead, this image of these two puzzle pieces, we're both happily coming together to look at this problem or solution and say, hey, we're on the same page here. We're on the same team. We just have to look at this problem together and figure out what's going on. It means you're going to need to listen to my perspective. I'm going to need to listen to yours. And we just need to leave the space for making sure that we keep a positive mindset as we approach where we're going with this conversation. And we all know we love Patrick Lencioni, and he has a conflict continuum that is represented here. And there's this sweet spot in the middle. We'll get to that. But we also have these other ends of the continuum where we either live in artificial harmony, which honestly is where I think the bulk of our teams really live.
Yeah.
It's this place of we never fight, we never argue, we love each other. We're the unicorn practice. And there's probably some truth to that. But in reality, there's probably a lot of underlying little issues and resentments that we're just brushing under the rug because it's just a little easier. And then we have the other end of the spectrum where we're talking about it's really destructive. I was going to say unconstructive. I don't know if that's a word too, but mean spirited, personal attacks. It becomes that you versus me type thing. And in the middle is this place of healthy, productive conflict. And that's really the sweet spot. When we talk about artificial harmony, we don't ever actually address real issues. It's very superficial, and there's not that layer of vulnerable based trust that we were referencing earlier on in the webinar. We don't really disagree, right? There's no room for it. It's not encouraged. It's almost uncomfortable if someone brings a differing opinion into the room. We have false agreements to keep the peace quite often. Like I might be a hygienist on the team and we're going to implement a new modality and I have questions about it or I'm not sure about it. But because we're not the type of team that embraces conflict, I'm just going to nod and go along. And I'm probably not even going to do it consistently in my op because I don't even really like it. But I'm not brave enough and we don't have a culture of having those types of conversations. You tend to be more closed off from feedback and disagreement is met with disapproval. You and Kirk often will say these webinars and podcasts ends up like therapy. You were just saying it a few minutes ago. So this is a little therapy for me. I was actually disinvited to team meetings when I worked on a particular team. We had team meetings that we lived in so much artificial harmony. Wonderful people. I'm still friends with some of them to this day. But the practice was just artificial harmony. And if anyone asked a question or offered a differing opinion, it was met with disapproval. So, this last statement there around disagreements are met with disapproval to the point where I was told if I was going to keep expressing basically a differing opinion, I just don't need to come to meetings anymore. And I thought, this doesn't feel very healthy to me. And so eventually I didn't work in that practice anymore because I wanted to be somewhere that was open to exploring different opinions and really embracing conflict in a positive way. Because luckily I have worked in practices that have encouraged that and fostered that. Now, the other side of it, dramas and cliques and alliances, oh my, this happens in our dental practices too. We end up with disagreements about everything. And then usually those disagreements turn into what you mentioned earlier, which is it's about that person and it gets really personal. And it's not really about the subject anymore or the thing that happened. It starts to become this interpersonal, meaty drama. And if we don't lead by example and saying, hey, we don't do that here, this is actually how we deal with conflict in this practice in a healthy way, which we're going to teach you a framework for in a moment. Then you're going to end up in a place where you have a lot of turnover. There's going to be a lot of turnover. There's going to be a lot of toxicity, and I would venture to guess, doctors, that you don't want to show up in the morning. Like, you sit in the parking lot taking a deep breath, like, we got to do this again, and it's only Tuesday. And so, what our goal is to try to help you through this webinar and our resources and materials within the BPA is really get to a place where you can feel like you're in that sweet spot where people treat each other with respect. Even if we're not friends, we're professional, we're colleagues, and we can have a really open and honest dialogue here in the office that's productive. We have open discussions, we find good solutions together, and we value other people's perspectives and opinions, and we don't create that storytelling. Ultimately, the goal of a leader is to foster a culture of productive conflict within your team. Now, when I say this, I do mean like, hey, dentist talking to you, office managers talking to you. But like we said earlier, a leader can be literally anyone. And when you foster this culture of productive conflict within your team, your practice will grow and the success will multiply, and you won't even know where it's coming from anymore. All right, are we ready to talk about why people struggle with conflict and a little bit of the framework for how to get there?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, number one is fear. A lot of people are just afraid of what's going to happen on the other side of approaching or addressing that conflict. Now, the better you get at this fear is going to go away because you start to see the positive outcome. But we have to remember that everyone's coming from their own perspective and looking through their own frame of life based on past experiences. So, somebody might have grown up in a home where conflict or voicing your opinion or a difference of opinion was not positive, right? So somebody might have worked in a practice more recently where they had a negative experience around conflict, and so you over time can just become a little bit afraid of taking on and not knowing what's going to happen on the other side of approaching and embracing that conflict. It can just feel a little scary, and that's reality. Some of that comes from not knowing how to have those tough conversations. There was a quote I just shared recently. I reposted it on Instagram. That was an old Kobe Bryant quote, but it was about when he felt the most nervous was when he knew he hadn't prepared. And when we know how to have these conversations and we get really good at practicing them and we take it on with the little small things first, the more prepared we feel to embrace conflict and really understand what it is, the easier it's going to get, and that fear will start to subside. We mentioned time, either not feeling like you have enough of it or not knowing when is the right time. And that's a real thing. We talk all the time about how busy our practices are. And 90% of the time, dentists are maybe 95, maybe 98 in some practices. They're in that clinical realm and not in the leader seat or in the entrepreneur seat. And so you do start to feel like, when am I even going to start implementing or create? How do you even take the time to create this culture? Or I don't know when I'm even going to sit down and have time to talk to Emily about that. The thing is, you can't afford to not find the time to do it. And so when we talk about those one-on-ones, that's a great way. But you have to start to develop a culture within your practice that this is how it's almost like non-negotiable. Like, this is what we do here. We embrace conflict. And I love your idea of a 48-hour rule. So when it comes to like, when should we do this? When is the right time? Sometimes you can even talk to each other and say, hey, I listened to this webinar. I want to start embracing conflict. Here's some of the strategies they shared. Here's this activity that we're going to go through with you in just a minute that you could do with your team. And then you say, let's agree on when is the right time to have these conversations and when isn't, right? A team member might tell you, I want to know kind of in the moment, because if you wait till the end of the week to sit down and recap something that happened on Monday, I'm probably not going to remember. I want you to tell me right after the appointment, not over the patient, but right after the appointment. So you can start to have open dialogue even about, when do we have these conversations? And even that can feel a little scary and like a little bit of conflict. But you can start with these small conversations of opening up trust with your team and saying, hey, we want to do this together. Let's collaborate on how to make it most effective.
Yeah. So if you've been listening to us here at Act and BPA, we're champions of core values. And this is a natural next progression to that, meaning, like the 48-hour rules, I also had with my team, and they created it, promises to my team. It was like our team saying, and it was revolved exactly around this. When I get feedback, I will act this way. When I give feedback, I will act this way. I will hear it in this way. I will try to do this. I will assume positive intention, not negative intention. So there's some things, there's some expectations that are wrong out there that sit at the heart of this matter. Number one is that doctors assume they should be liked. And I know how bad that sounds, but your goal is not to be liked, it is to be respected. Now, I like to be liked. But if you're liked but not respected, that's a bad formula. And so respect and clarity will, like without respect will always fall to unlike. Respect will always lead to respect and likability. So the goal for doctor as a leader, I want to be clear and kind and respected, and I hope they like me because I'm going to show them that I like them. Now, for the team, the goal is not to be a family. It is not to be friends. If that is the goal, you will always, always, always fail because that is not appropriate for an organization. Now, again, if you become friends on top of working as a successful business unit, that's gravy on top, and that's awesome. And there's some fantastic practices that are all friends, but they didn't start as friends. They became friends through this vulnerability conflict.
Mhm.
Two people will grow closer through going through a healthy conflict than they will by just getting along. Let's just go there, Miranda. You and I, we've had some conflict recently.
Sure, we have.
We're,
But I respect you and like you, so
yeah,
that's
we
good.
have had conversations about differing opinions about how to go from A to B.
Yeah.
Now, we can have that conversation and we're both good with it because I know you respect me and I know you know I'm coming from a good place and vice versa. So we can get into it a little bit. And what vulnerability based trust is, I can be vulnerable. I can share my opinion with Miranda. I can say, I was wrong or I think you're wrong. And I know at the end of the day, she's going to actually respect me more and
Hmm.
vice versa. And so we can get into it and we do it in a healthy way. But if our goal is to be friends, we're never going to have that conversation. If my goal is purely for Miranda to like me and not be, her boss and leader and be respected, I'm never having that conversation. And if I don't have that conversation, and likewise, if she doesn't feel comfortable bringing that conversation to me and we don't have it, we swipe it under the rug, those resentments build and build and build. And this false harmony explodes someday. And it all falls apart because we were afraid to just be vulnerable.
And that's also when you get the letter of resignation on your desk that you didn't expect,
Yep.
right? Because we live
From
in
one of your
we're
favorite
living over here
employees.
in artificial harmony. We
Yep.
all get along. We never disagree. We never fight. And then one of your favorite, probably one of those team members who really could have been that person who's developed into a cultural leader, lays the letter on your desk that says, "I'm out of here." And you have no idea what's going on. You're blindsided, but they've been harboring something for a really long period of time. But as a leader, we didn't create or develop within our culture that we talk about things together, right? And now everyone's family experience is different, but when you think about family, that's kind of the thing. Is at the end of the day, my brother and I are totally opposite people, totally opposite ends of the spectrum. I love him to his core because he's my brother. We're family. And so we can have those things and know we're going to come back. You and I, same thing. Like, I do consider you a friend at this point. We've colleagues and now we're friends. And so
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, if we have a disagreement or differing opinions or perspectives, we can hash that out. Like you said, we can get into it. And it's not mean spirited. It is met with it's you receive that information well, and I do the same and try to give you that space because we both know it's coming from a good place. And I reference this book Radical Candor often, but it's really, really good because what they talk about in the book Radical Candor is how do you care deeply and balance that with being able to challenge directly? And the reality is, when you care deeply and your team knows, that you value them as a person and vice versa, there's that respect and trust, then you can challenge and have this conflict in a positive way. And there's these two other spectrums outside of radical candor, which are manipulative insincerity and ruinous empathy. To the point, and think of the words ruinous empathy. You're so empathetic and concerned about hurting people's feelings or being liked or whatever it is that you're actually ruining the relationship by way of ignoring, not moving into that conflict conversation. And vice versa on the other side. Like we're being insincere with these pleasantries and compliments that maybe are void of reality because we don't want to give real feedback because that makes us feel uncomfortable. And so now we're manipulating the relationship and the situation through these insincerities simply because it doesn't make me feel good. And so I think you hit the nail on the head with some of the fear base, which is, some of that fear is, well, what if they don't like me anymore after we have that conversation? And the right people will like you more for having that conversation because it's going to fuel and feed and develop them as team members in your practice. Now, there's some reality to the fact that I enjoy conflict, healthy conflict. Trust me, I do not like aggressive, mean spirited conflict, but I do enjoy healthy conflict. And you really are comfortable with embracing that too. And I think something we need to remember is that there are certain communication or personality styles that are naturally going to be better at managing and embracing conflict. You're a D, right? DC style.
I'm a
So I
D.
know.
Yeah.
Okay.
DC. Yeah.
So not everybody knows DISC styles, but there's 4 primary communication styles, and 3% of our population are D style people. We're 2 of them sitting here on this call. I'm more of a DI, you're more of a DC. So D style people, 3% of the population, are really open to embracing conflict, tend to be very direct communicators. So it fits their communication and personality style to like lay it on the line and let's just talk about what's going on. I styles, which are 11% of the population, also tend to not be bothered so much by embracing conflict conversations. And a big piece of that is I styles are driven by relationship. And they know through experience that when we encounter and embrace these conflict conversations, these relationships get stronger and even better. And I feel even closer and more connected. And that's really important to someone with an I style personality. Now, those are pretty small percentages, as you can see. We still have 84% of the population that are S and C style communicators, both of which are conflict averse naturally. Because S style communicators really want to keep the peace. They like harmony. They really don't want to ruffle any feathers. It just goes against the grain of how they naturally prefer to communicate. And C style, it's more the concern over irrational emotion. A lot of times, a C style is so logical in their thought that conflict can feel a little irrational at times when emotion comes into it. And so they'd rather just not than do. And certainly, if there's any criticism involved towards the C style person, they do tend to take that personally. It's one of their greatest fears is being criticized. So, Barry, you mentioned earlier feedback, and another great book. We love to drop books. Is called Thanks for the Feedback. And that book, Thanks for the Feedback, talks about framing the feedback that you're providing around these conversations in giving it and in receiving it, where you're thinking of it as either celebration and acknowledgement, which everybody loves. No one's going to refuse that. Or most of us default to any type of conflict conversation or feedback as judgment or evaluation. So we get a little defensive. When in reality, if we can frame these conflict conversations and feedback into coaching or mentoring conversations, and we can also frame it when we're receiving it that way, and we can stop and we can say, wait, maybe Barrett's not actually judging me right now. He's just providing me with some coaching because he sees a different or better way that we could explore this. Cool. I can calm down a little bit now and we can have that conversation in a more productive way than we would have otherwise. So ultimately, it just comes down to a few things to get really, really good at embracing conflict. And one of those is mindset. We have to remember, and we're going to go to each one of these, but mindset is that conflict is helpful and not harmful when done well. And when you can take that image earlier, that, the bright red words and the people screaming at each other and like crumble that up and throw it away and replace it with that image of two people approaching a problem or an issue with the mindset of, hey, we're going to figure this out together. That's when conflict becomes helpful and it's no longer harmful in your practice. You also have to practice it. Tough conversations only get easier the more you practice them. You're not good at them? Well, I would say you're just not good at them yet. And you can start really, really small with things that aren't big, monumental things that have been boiling up inside of you for 2 years. Maybe don't start there, but little teeny things. And this is in your life in general. You have to lead by example. As goes the leader, goes the team. So we're going to dig in here. We're getting, we needed 2 hours. We're going to dig in here. Mindset and then some strategies for how we can put this into play. So there's an exercise that you can use with your team to help with mindset that we have within our best practices association and our coaching community. And it's called fostering a productive conflict culture. And you basically sit down with your team and you allow everyone to really brainwrite around these very specific questions of how could our team benefit if we disagreed more with one another? You got some examples there. We could come up with more creative ideas. We could spot assumptions that people are making. We could improve patient care by discussing different treatment approaches that maybe we wouldn't have explored otherwise. What happens if you think something contrary, but you don't say it, right? And everyone brainwrites around creative thoughts that they might have around this. Like maybe we're like, if we don't say something contrary in the moment, we're going to get more and more frustrated over time, and that'll be resentment. You don't give the team a chance to benefit from new ideas. You know, if a hygienist notices a repetitive scheduling issue but doesn't speak up because it's a contrary belief, that could lead to greater delays in the schedule, stressful days, patients having to wait and having bad experiences. So sometimes putting contrary voices into the room can be positive. Having your team think about, what does it mean to be the devil's advocate? How can this role be helpful? This one serves the purpose of avoiding that artificial harmony. When you have someone who's not afraid to put a different perspective into the room, even if it's not a perspective that they ultimately have a lot of belief behind, it's just like, hey, we should probably think of it from this angle. It helps you challenge assumptions. It's nice because then it's if you actually assign the role at team meetings of someone kind of being the devil's advocate during issue time, then it's met with a place of like, we already know they're going to be bringing these ideas to the table because we've asked them to, and it's a good thing. It means challenging a decision, questioning if there's a more efficient way to manage patient flow, and that can help bottlenecks. That helps the patients, that helps the practice grow. Another great question is part of your 48-hour rule, right? When is the right time to disagree and when is the wrong time to disagree? You know, you might say the right time is early on in a project versus waiting until it's done and then sharing the fact that you don't think it's a good idea. You know, you don't necessarily want to wait until the decision's made. Disagreeing when a clinical protocol might impact patient safety, choosing to speak up in meetings or privately. You can create these agreements within your team around when is the right time to voice this conflict perspective and when isn't. And what behavior would derail our attempts to have productive conflict? Talk as a team about, hey, what do we think might get in the way? If this is something we're really going to start trying to implement, doctor, you did this webinar, then you brought it, you made us watch it. We're all excited to start embracing conflict. Have the conversation of what could derail this. Well, I mean, we could derail it if we become defensive or judgmental when someone's offering feedback. If we shut down during conversations, that's going to probably prevent progress. You guys can talk as a team about how we're going to build this culture that fosters productive conflict. The next piece after mindset is practice. And so we have a couple of tools within our association that help with courageous conversations. And this just happens to be my favorite one. And it's called the awareness wheel. And it's called that because a lot of times when you're bringing an issue or you feel like there's conflict starting to build, the other person sometimes isn't even aware that that conflict exists. They're just living their best life. They don't know you're upset that you're not setting up the room the way that they would set up the room. And so the whole purpose of this is a communication framework to help bring awareness to whatever the issue or conflict is, and then talk through it in a way that we're looking at the problem solving together and it doesn't become a you versus me. So we always start with the what is, just what's the fact of the matter. We share our thoughts, beliefs, or assumptions and our personal feelings, wants, and desires for the future. Nowhere within the framework of the awareness wheel can we use you statements. It's all about how I'm feeling and experiencing this conflict. And then we give the space for the other person to do the same. So we're going to go through an example so that you can kind of hear, it's a little blurry, so that you can hear what this might look like. Okay. So perhaps someone isn't showing up on time for huddle, right? We talked about that earlier. You need to address it because you don't want to create this culture that permits this. And now we have multiple people showing up late, the same scenario we had earlier. So you're going to go and state what is to that person. You're going to say, hey, our team agreements state that everyone arrives by 7:40 so that we can start huddle at 7:45. This week, you arrived 3 out of the 4 days after huddle began. Now, you can't say that if it's not true, but as long as we really do have team agreements that say we show up at 7:40 and huddle starts at 7:45, we all signed those team agreements. We've all agreed to it. And this person really genuinely did show up after huddle started 3 out of 4 days this week. This is really just an unarguable fact of the situation. I'm going to share what I imagine is going on now as the leader. I'm going to say, I imagine that you don't realize the importance of being here before huddle starts, or that something's preventing you from making it on time, right? This is the story I'm telling myself. Let's talk about it instead of me just having the storytelling brewing in the background. I feel disappointed that you're not here and honoring that commitment that we all made as a team. Here's what I want. I really want for everyone to be here, be prepared and ready to go for huddle. I want to better understand what's been preventing you from being able to do that, right? Because we have to give them the benefit of the doubt at times that we don't always know the whole story. And this is where we're meeting in the middle. Picture those puzzle pieces. This is where we're meeting in the middle and trying to fit those pieces together. Here's what I'd like to do. Like, I haven't said anything up until now. I was really hoping it might be a fluke, but I don't want to let this go any longer without discussing it or getting to a solution. I'd like to see you here by 7:40 and ready to add value to morning huddle. And then you just give them the floor. So everything I've said during this framework of the awareness wheel is about how I feel. It's about my assumptions. Now, mind you, you're not going to just jump in and start doing this without explaining, perhaps at your team meeting, like, hey, we're going to start using this framework to try to manage these problems. I have teams that use this and they actually say, hey, I'm going to do that thing that we talked about with Miranda. I'm going to do that awareness wheel. Okay. So just bear with me because I'm going to do it. But it's how you start to practice having these conversations that don't naturally feel comfortable, but it keeps it from becoming accusatory. And so, as a leader, you can lead by example by creating regular opportunities for open dialogue. We talked about one on ones, being the example and showing up vulnerable, encouraging your team to do the same. Using this team exercise to actually shift the mindset around how we think about conflict. Look at the framework like awareness wheel. There's another one called Arch that we have a resource for that help for you to tackle these conversations in a structured way that makes it a little easier to work through. Showing your team that conflict doesn't have to mean fighting. In fact, it shouldn't mean fighting. It actually should mean getting along better than you ever have before because we're just problem solving together. And when you start seeing your team show up with these little conflict moments and taking it on and being the leaders for your culture, you have to celebrate that and acknowledge it. And if you have a core value that's built around that, tie it into your core values, right? So the biggest issue, I'm going to run everybody slightly over time. It is what it is. It's so good. The biggest issue that people say when we talk about this is, well, what if my team doesn't respond well? Right? Because we go back to fear, which is the number one reason people avoid embracing conflict. So here's what I would say. Just be vulnerable and empathetic. Here's why it helps. Resistance is often coming from fear or misunderstanding. When you acknowledge their feelings, it can lower the defenses. So here's what you say. It seems like this topic is really tough to talk about. What's on your mind? I can see you're upset. I want to understand where you're coming from. Tell me a little bit more about how you're feeling right now. I'm not here to blame or criticize. If that's how you're experiencing this, I'm really sorry. I just want this to be some coaching. I want us to work through this together. You really do have to. Sometimes I think as leaders, we think we have to be the big, strong leader all the time. And in reality, we do have to sometimes get down on this vulnerable level and say, hey, we're down here together. Like, I want to work this problem out with you. Pause and try again. If you try this and you're like, well, that didn't go well, pause and try again. Why does this help? Because if someone shuts down, pushing harder and trying to get through it and get them to see what you want them to see is only going to make it worse. So take a step back and create a sense of safety. I feel like this just isn't the right time to go deeper, or this isn't going, the way that I had hoped it would. I'd like for us to revisit it later. Let's take 24 hours. Let's take 48 hours. Let's both think and come back to this with fresh minds. Let's take a moment to reset. I really value your input and I want to make sure you feel heard. I feel like right now, neither one of us is creating that space for each other. This is about finding a solution together, not placing blame. How can we move forward? When someone gets defensive, I think that's the, easiest thing to say is like, no blame. That's not what this is right now. I want us to find a solution and I want to hear your thoughts and opinions. And sometimes you just have to pause and try again. Keep communication open. Defensive reactions often close off communication. We see someone get defensive and they shut down and then we shut down. So you can use bridge statements to keep that communication open and help shift the focus. So just reminding them, hey, we're on the same team. I know we both want what's best for our patients. I know we both want what's best for the practice. Another thing might be I'm bringing this up because I believe in your potential and I want to support you. Even though this feels uncomfortable, I think this conversation is going to help us grow. Will you stick it out with me? Take a breath. Right? And this obviously doesn't come naturally. We have to practice it. We have to shift our mindset as leaders that we're trying to develop a team that's built to stay and that we're creating this trust within our community. So I have some final takeaways, but before we jump into them, any thoughts on that last segment? I talked through
Yeah.
any space, Barrett.
No, I know you're doing such a fantastic job. I've gone through this as the leader. I've proposed this to a team, like we've got to build trust. I've worked through it and it's hard and it's totally worth it and it doesn't happen overnight. And so it's a consistency, baby steps, one step at a time. And doctors, you got to go first. So when I did this, there were a couple meetings in a row where I just took arrows on purpose. Like, hey, I'm going to go first. Like, I know there's a conflict about things that I do and say. I want to hear them. And it was really hard because, of course, they're not all fair, but most are. And you sit there and you take them and you say, you're right. You're right. I have to do better at that. You're right. And your team is watching you. And if you can't do it and show them what it looks like to be vulnerable, then you can't expect them. And so I love the idea of putting this framework out and then going first and just taking as many arrows as you need to. Because one, you're going to get better. Two, you're going to learn a lot about yourself. But most importantly, you're modeling what it looks like to take constructive feedback, not get defensive, and then show them that I'm actually going to do something about it. I'm actually going to improve on as many things as I can. And then they will now be say it. Oh, if he can do it, I can do it. And I actually like something silly you said, Miranda. Like, okay, we're gonna have. Can we have one of these trust conversations? Even something like jovial like that means like, okay, yeah, we're gonna do this framework. Okay, there's so many like little ways to make this work in a healthy way. And the ironic thing about it is the better you get at conflict, the less conflict you have. All
Mhm.
of a sudden you have no conflict because people just talk things out.
Yep.
And it's pretty cool when that happens.
I love that. I think it is important to you have to frame it. If you like the ideas that we're talking about here and you say I need this, all those examples that they talked about at the beginning, yes, that's happening in my practice. I think you just have to it's an initiative that has to happen within the practice of saying, I think we need a culture that embraces conflict and you can ask everybody, what does conflict mean to you? And you're going to get a lot of different definitions. And then you can explain, here's what I want us to think of around conflict moving forward. And you can start to bring that new and different way to embrace that into the practice. When you avoid tough conversations, it might feel safe in the moment, but it's going to keep you stuck. Productive conflict is going to help build trust, which in time builds a stronger team, a higher performing team, a team that stays, which in turn is going to allow for you to be more productive, have better patient experiences. build these systems within the practice that everyone holds each other accountable to. And now you're not having to micromanage everyone on your team and stress and worry about everything all the time. And it all starts with embracing conflict and recognizing that conflict doesn't mean confrontation, right? It's just a conversation. It doesn't have to be a fight. It doesn't have to be dramatic or intense or aggressive. So conflict and confrontation don't mean the same thing. It's just a conversation. We're going to be collaborating on this together. Let's look at it as collaboration versus a you versus me.
Yep.
And here would be my final takeaway, my one kind of challenge to everyone before we wrap is just have one courageous conversation this week. And if you're like, I don't know how to use the awareness wheel, we only talked about it for 5 minutes today. That's okay. A courageous conversation can be something really, really small and non threatening. It doesn't have to be some big thing that's been building up for time. Just pick one little thing this week. When you're at your office and you have that little twinge in your gut of like, oh, just go have the conversation. Just go be vulnerable. Like, hey, I'm feeling a little bit like this. I feel like maybe there's a system here that we need to revisit together. Can we sit down and talk about it sometime soon? Just pick one little thing this week that you're going to have a courageous conversation around and embrace conflict and just see how it goes. Focus on understanding and being open and not blaming. So, a lot of those I statements and not you statements. All right. What are your final takeaways, Barrett? And if there's any questions, like we can certainly answer them.
Just say that this recording is going to be in the BPA. So it's free. Become a basic member. You'll be able to watch this whole recording as well as all the other recordings. There is a question about clicks, and we'll get to that. Doctors, if you want to join us into the Top Study Club, hit that QR code. It's on the website as well. I think you'll find it hugely valuable. And then lastly, just keep coming back to these webinars. I love the idea of think of one courageous conversation a week. That's a very actionable way with low pressure. Like, I'm just going to take a step at a time and see how this feels. And you'll be amazed at, it's amazing how great a leader you can become by just being vulnerable and listening to people tell you how to be better.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned there's a question about clicks.
There's one question about what do you do about clicks? How do you decrease them, de-emphasize them? And it's something that every dental team deals with, I think.
It is. So if you remember on the slide about the destructive conflict, drama and cliques and alliances, oh my, it's very, very common. And I feel like this question could be answered from two different perspectives. How do you prevent them? To me is purely core values. It's core values and embracing conflict. It's having core values in place that help our team to know how to behave, how to engage with one another, how we show up on any given day, followed by embracing conflict and saying, as a leader, when I see those things not being modeled within my team, when I see these cliques developing, when I notice, and I know, when there's those 3 or 4 people going to happy hour and talking smack after work, you know who they are, you know it exists, but it's like so much easier to pretend like it's not happening. You have to catch it. Oh my gosh, this is an example. If you have a dog, if you have an aggressive dog and you're on a walk and you see the hair, that peeks up on their haunches and they get their ears perk up because that other dog is walking down the street, you can't wait until they're fighting with that dog to correct them, right? You have to do it as soon as the hair stands up on the back of their neck and you say, nope, we don't do that here. We don't do that on walks. And I'm not trying to relate team members to dogs, right? I've been a team member my whole life in the dental practice. But in the same way, as a leader, when you see and sense those clicks starting to happen, that triangulation, those drama triangles starting to happen, you go and you look at your core values and you say, hey, what behaviors, which values do these behaviors that I'm seeing happen, which ones does it conflict with? Which value? Because I'm going to go have a values conversation with these team members. And I'm going to say, hey, one of our core values here is we treat each other with respect. We're going to talk about what respect means because it doesn't mean what we're doing right now. So to me, it's like tying together core values and being able to embrace conflict and hold people accountable to those behaviors that you agree are what's going to make a really positive culture in your practice. Do you think anything differently there, Barrett?
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And you identify the behaviors. The outcome of the click has behaviors or scenarios that cause cultural damage, and you point on those. You don't, it's not that these three people get along. It's that the side chatter, for example, is very obvious since you focus on that, and like you said, you just got to address it in a healthy way
Yeah.
sooner rather than later.
Sooner rather
Because,
now now that was, that's when people are coming in. If it's already existing, it is a little bit harder.
yeah,
But I think the answer is still the same,
I agree.
right? There's some core
100%.
value that's being rubbed against within your practice, and you can do similarly to like we said in that awareness wheel example. If I haven't said anything before, right? Get vulnerable. I haven't said anything before. A couple of reasons. One, I was really just hoping that it was going to go away and it wasn't going to become a bigger thing, but it has. Also, it's a little uncomfortable for me to even have to address this because it doesn't really fit with our core values here. So I'm going to be real vulnerable with you. This is a hard conversation for me to have. But like I have never talked about it. I know it's been going on, but today's the day and we're going to be doing things differently moving forward.
Hmm.
And I think if you just always loop your core values in and we talk about the core value and not about you three people that are causing this drama, you're always going to end up on the right side of things in the same way that we reference talking about a system versus the person. So, yeah.
Good
Any other
stuff.
questions before we hop off?
I didn't see any. So
All
I
right.
did
Well, the
post the
CE was in the
CE in
chat.
there.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
if you want
then,
CE, copy and paste the directions there.
yep. And yep. Again, if you see this class again, yeah, just go be a BPA member. You can download it on your apps, and then you'll be able to access it on your laptop or desktop, and you'll get all the webinars.
Yeah. All the webinars, all the master classes, all the
Yeah.
podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of it. So
It's all
come
right
hang
there.
out in the
So come
BPA.
on in. We'd love to have you.
Barrett,
And
thanks for doing this with me today.
I had fun.
Good. See, conflict conversations can be fun.
Absolutely. Let's do it again soon.
Sounds good. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Miranda. Bye, everyone.
Bye.